Hi, this is Miss Schmuck coming to you with the podcast Harry Walking His Own Path. We've moved on to Act 2 of Harry's life. Here's a recap from the first of the three-parter, Harry Born a Prince. We can acknowledge that Harry was born into privilege because of monarchy, but real-world problems still invaded to rip his world apart. First, with the bitter dissolution of his parents' marriage, and by the traumatizing, abrupt loss of his mother. But Harry pressed on, as we will see in this episode, Harry walking his own path. August 31st, 1997, Diana died, and on September 6th, 12-year-old Harry walked in the funeral procession behind his mother's casket. Photos of that day show his face set whether in anger or repressed grief, or a bit of both, for this public follow-up to the worst day of his life. He has acknowledged that his mother's death and the aftermath set him on a destructive path. After all, several years later, he will read the ruling from the inquest that the crash was due to grossly negligent driving and to the pursuing paparazzi. In his own words, he said, "My mother has just died, and I had to walk a long way behind her coffin, surrounded by thousands of people watching me, while millions more did on television. I don't think any child should be asked to do that under any circumstances. I don't think it would happen today." He was angry as well as adrift as he fought to break his royal bonds so he could live the ordinary life his mother had shown him. While there may not have been one event that opened the yearning for a life outside of the palace walls, his mother's untimely death certainly set him on a course to reflect and then make life-changing decisions about his own life, and I think for his own sanity, long before Meghan. He said once, "I can safely say that losing my mom at the age of 12 and therefore shutting down all of my emotions for the last 20 years has had a quite serious effect on not only my personal life, but my work as well. I have probably been very close to a complete breakdown on numerous occasions when all sorts of grief and all sorts of lies and misconceptions are coming from every angle." Although Harry talks about receiving therapy, it is doubtful that he was given any help at the time of his mother's passing. Grief counseling, even if a thing at that time, would probably not have been deemed appropriate for the future king's child. Instead, trips to the countryside with his father were fed to the public as the balm for his unhappy soul. And maybe it helped temporarily to be rewarded with his father's undivided attention. But Harry has said that his first time getting help was in 2014 at his brother's suggestion. So that's about 8 years that he suffered in silence from about 12 years old to 20 years old. Out of this tumultuous scene, and from within the indulgent, if not conservative atmosphere of royal life, Harry had to find his path. How to become self-reliant and independent. And how does that happen when everything is planned for him, and any move he makes has to be approved, and although a spare to the throne, the latitude for self-expression is a narrow one. But really, how does he learn humility, responsibility, and accountability when second chances are a given and the support system smooths away offenses? How are you not filled with self-importance when your lineage says you are important and above the rest, and the media, the public, and their tourism dollars make you a money-earning spectacle every time you're in their view? I think there's a bit of natural grit in the personality, but also a mindset that has to be worked on and relied upon to not be an ass. And Harry acted out, putting all of that to the test. One incident after another occurred for tabloids fodder. The firm issued apologies, while behind the scenes efforts were made to rein in his rebelliousness. As mentioned, it was at William's urging Harry came to grips that he was still struggling with his suppressed grief, and took up boxing as an outlet for aggression. Acknowledging that his pain was a vital part to that mind shift is important. Still, there were rocky times ahead as he flared up most times in the public eye. The saving grace seems to be the military. At 23 years old, he joined the Blues and Royals, and upon successful completion of the course, became a commissioned Army officer. During 10 years as an Army officer, he served in Afghanistan twice, including a tour piloting a helicopter. Harry was the first royal in more than 25 years to serve in a war zone. He didn't hide from the dangerous landscape and seemingly found his stride in this environment. Not only did he feel normal, those are his words, but he got the discipline and friendship with people who didn't care about that second skin, the whole prince thing. There was no palace intrigue. His father's relationship with Camilla wasn't in his face, and he wasn't under his brother's shadow. Despite the dangerous conditions of serving in a war zone, Harry had focus and direction, and he said that he realized at that time the importance of his grandmother, not just as a grandmother, but as the ruling monarch. For those who think he disrespects the Queen or is sabotaging the monarchy, they're misguided with their opinions. Maybe, just maybe, Harry will show how senior royals can serve their country's interests in a way that provides for their longevity, rather than constantly face the question of their relevancy. Sadly for Harry, however, in 2007, the Army chiefs decided not to send him to Iraq because of unacceptable risks. But later, he did spend 10 weeks serving in Afghanistan when he returned as an Apache helicopter pilot before qualifying as an Apache commander. With such a rich and rewarding military life, there is no other conclusion to be drawn at how vindictive it was to strip Harry of his honorary military titles as Captain General of the Royal Marines, Honorary Air Force Commandant of the Royal Air Force Base Huntington, and Honorary Commodore-in-Chief of the Royal Naval Command's Small Ships and Diving. He had not breached protocol. He had not committed immoral or unethical acts. Yet he suffered as if he had dishonored the rules and traditions. Harry's not to be underestimated. He's got a strong determination and a certain amount of confidence not to buckle under the negative. For Harry, the young man in his 20s, underwent a change from the brash bad boy to a steadier, fun-loving man who was ready to invest his time and attention to specific charities that had meaningful connections to him. Some were from his personal experiences, such as the military, and some were his continuation of his mother's efforts. As a reminder of Diana's philanthropic legacy, she began her work with AIDS victims with the opening of the landmark AIDS Center in South London. During the time of panic and misinformation, Diana willingly had physical contact with AIDS patients as the first British royal figure to do so. Diana noted, HIV does not make people dangerous to know. You can shake their hands, give them a hug. Heaven knows they need it. What's more, you can share their homes, their workplaces, and their playgrounds and toys. Now, I've reflected on this period of time, and by the end of my high school days, our big thing, it was herpes, was the disease to be afraid of. And the public health discussion was talking about using condoms even if you're on the pill. By college, the next thing that public health was focusing on was the AIDS pandemic. The disease was falsely labeled the gay flu or attributed to the homosexual lifestyle. And the reaction was, well, if I'm not gay, I don't have to worry about it. Or if you're diagnosed, then you were gay. Arthur Ashe, the professional tennis player, among others, died from untested blood transfusions that caused even more panic and misinformation. Fear was so rampant about how one would get it that people were exhibiting extreme behaviors against others who they suspected had it. Even medical staff were resigning from hospitals. I knew a nurse who cared for patients that once brought into the hospitals with a diagnosis never received visitors because their family basically indicted them for having the disease or were afraid to be around them. so they die without ever seeing a family member. In 1997, Diana visited South Africa where she met with President Nelson Mandela, and in the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, it teamed up with Princess of Wales Memorial Fund to help victims of AIDS after her death. Mandela praised Diana, saying, "When she stroked the limbs of someone with leprosy or sat on the bed of a man with HIV or AIDS and held his hand, she transformed public attitudes and improved the life chances of such people." He said Diana had used her celebrity status to fight stigma attached to people living with HIV and AIDS. Almost 10 years later, Harry and the Prince of Lesotho jointly founded Sentabale, a name that means forget-me-not, a charity to support the mental health and well-being of children and young people affected by HIV and AIDS in Lesotho, Botswana, and Malawi. He's been a big proponent on HIV testing and publicly took an HIV test in Barbados with Rihanna to take away the stigma and promoting the responsibility of protecting oneself. Harry was not hiding the fact that he would carry on his mother's work and initiatives. In his heart, he would pick up the torch and keep moving to carry on her work. I purposely am not saying that he's finished her work because I see Harry one day introducing his child or children to his mother's legacy and continuing it as part of now Harry and Meghan's legacy. As he said, "My mother died when I was very young. I didn't want to be in the position I was in. But I eventually pulled my head out of the sand, started listening to people, and decided to use my role for good. I'm now fired up and energized and love charity stuff, meeting people and making them laugh." In September 2019, Harry visited the Halo Trust in Angola to walk the path of his mother, who toured an active minefield. Diana was the patron of Halo Trust, an organization that removed debris, particularly landmines left behind by the war. There had been photos of Diana touring an Angolan minefield in a ballistic helmet and flak jacket. Despite criticism of meddling in politics, her actions resulted in funding and successful removal efforts. Harry gets his share of criticisms about what subjects he should stay away from or what he said about a particular issue. And what we see from Harry is that he has and will continue to speaking his truth. During the Commonwealth Trust video call this year, he didn't play a word salad to distance his privilege when he stated that it is important that the wrongs of the past are acknowledged. Here's a man who has seen the worst of the human conditions, whether as part of his royal duties or his time in war-torn conditions. He could have come away with a cynical overview by compartmentalizing his thoughts and emotions with distance from those affected. You know, like the other royals do when they visit a hospital or take photos among people ravaged by various afflictions. They've mastered that emotional, distant, impersonal dissonance that masquerades as dignified compassion. Diana embraced those with HIV and leprosy. She recognized that need for human contact and to be seen as worthy. And Harry, with the same vigor and impulsiveness, is jumping right in because of a strong desire to raise that human condition. It's not mere talk. He's found his stride, his path to be an independent thinker responsible for his actions. In that previously mentioned video call with the Commonwealth Trust, he said, "When you look across the Commonwealth, there is no way that we can move forward unless we acknowledge the past. So many people have done such an incredible job of acknowledging the past and trying to right those wrongs. But I think we all acknowledge there is so much more still to do. It's not going to be easy, and in some cases, it's not going to be comfortable. But it needs to be done, because guess what? Everybody benefits." Once again, we turn to Diana, who was a staunch and longtime supporter of charities and organizations that focus on social and mental issues. Considering her own journey, she certainly had reason to be an advocate. For his part, Harry participated in a campaign to end the stigma surrounding mental health problems. In his words, he'd shut down all his emotions for nearly 20 years after his mother's sudden death and had been very close to a complete breakdown and on the verge of punching someone on numerous occasions. That candid conversation has earned him not only support but respect for someone of his status to acknowledge his struggles. Only idiots in the media and closed-minded average folk would find fault in his honesty and transparency, because Harry's biggest goal is to make his mother proud with what he's accomplished, with his choice for a soulmate, with his bold actions to live that normal life that she did her best to show him. And that drive was probably behind his biggest and most dear project, the Invictus Games. Harry relied on his passion, military experience, and his royal connections to bring a unique concept to life. The Invictus Games was fashioned to be an Olympic-style sports competition for injured and disabled military men and women and was launched in London in 2014. That previous year, Harry's trip to the Warrior Games in the USA gave him a view of how the power of sport could help wounded servicemen and women in their recovery, physically, psychologically, and socially. With the Royal Foundation and the Ministry of Defense, Harry brought his idea to fruition in a relatively short time. Harry said, "I have witnessed firsthand how the power of sport can positively impact the lives of wounded, injured, and sick servicemen and women in their journey of recovery." Harry's love for the Games and the participants showed when at the 2017 Games in Toronto, Harry made his first official appearance with Meghan. And by the next year's Games in Sydney as newlyweds, Harry mentioned Meghan's pregnancy at both the opening and closing ceremonies. Upon his leaving the Senior Royal Roadshow, the status of the Invictus Games was up for debate, especially among the trolls. But Harry had no intention of abandoning any of his charities or initiatives. And although the COVID pandemic has caused cancellation of this year's events, the date for the next year is set for The Hague, with new countries Belgium and South Korea joining, along with Germany stepping up as host for 2022. We know that Harry is no longer with the Royal Foundation, and Invictus Games is its own foundation with funding from Harry's Endeavour Fund. While his philanthropic endeavors are his passion and largely his job, Harry has stepped up to talk on issues that aren't normally part of the royal lineup. At the Nepal Girls Summit, where the country has the highest rate of child marriages, a practice now outlawed, he said, "While the unique challenges faced by girls is not a topic I have spoken much about in the past, I think it's important to acknowledge something that has become obvious to me and is already known to everyone in this room. There are way too many obstacles between girls and the opportunities they deserve." He continued, "So many countries and cultures are failing to protect the opportunities of young women and girls in the way they do for boys." From Emma Watson's He for She campaign, Harry said, "This is not just about women. We men need to recognize the part we play too. Real men treat women with dignity and give them the respect they deserve." Maybe Harry, having grown up in that house of privilege and all the good and bad that has directly impacted his life, is well suited to be the one to step out and be an advocate. His actions certainly prove his transformative mindset, and he's not asking for permission. Harry is most certainly walking his own path. So see you for this three-part conclusion, Harry, Breaking Barriers for Love, to discuss all things Harry and Meghan. So this is Mishmunk, signing out.